Listen to the words of the risen Christ. Peace be with you. Come see his hands and the wound in his side. Peace be with you.
Well, hello and welcome to our Good Friday reflection in a series that we've called The Road to Easter. If, like me, you spent any time in a Sunday school or a church youth group, or if you have been involved in some form of Christian youth work, then I imagine you will be very familiar with the idea of an object lesson. These would often involve taking an everyday activity or a common household item and applying some spiritual lesson to its form or use. For whatever reason, one that always stuck in my head involved a tube of toothpaste. I have heard this applied to our words, for in the same way that it is almost impossible to put the toothpaste back in the tube, we cannot easily take back our words. But another potential illustration relates to the idea that when pressure is applied, what is on the inside comes out. For some folk, it may be relatively simple to be civil, considerate and pleasant when the world is calm and things seem to be going your way. It is perhaps quite another thing to be thoughtful, forgiving and loving when your world and circumstances are at their worst. Crucifixion was truly an awful way to die. In his commentary on the Gospel of Luke, Professor Craig A. Evans describes it in the following way. Because deterrence was a primary objective, the cross was always erected in a public place. Death came slowly, often after several days, and resulted from the cumulative impact of thirst, hunger, exhaustion, exposure, and the traumatic effects of the scourging. After death, the body was usually left hanging on the cross. Because of the protracted suffering and the extreme ignominy of this manner of execution, it was viewed by Romans as the supreme penalty and the most wretched of deaths. It is under this kind of pressure, it is whilst experiencing this most wretched of deaths, that Jesus is thinking of others. We see this evidenced at several points in the narratives of the four Gospels that chronicle his final hours. We see it in his remarkable and gracious prayer, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." We see it in his welcoming of the repentant, hopeful thief, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And we see it once again in his concern for the ongoing well-being of his mother and his friend. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." So from that hour the disciple took her into his home. The forgiveness, acceptance and compassion that were the hallmarks of Jesus' life and teaching were now also being seen at his death. Although it is only speculation, it would not at all be surprising to me if it were these displays of love and grace under pressure that led to the centurion in John's Gospel being able to say, "Truly, this was the Son of God." In John's Gospel, the final words of Jesus are recorded as, "It is finished." For some, the idea that the crucifixion of an individual could bring about anything good, or that this Friday that is commemorated all around the world can be called in any way good, is a bizarre one. Perhaps this part of the Christian narrative has always been seen as bizarre. Perhaps this is part of what the Apostle Paul was getting at when he wrote to the church in Corinth, Jews demand signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Though to the Jews, the idea of a crucified Messiah would be scandalous, and to the Romans, the idea of a God killed by men made little sense. In the New Testament, it is impossible to separate the idea of the gospel, the good news, from the death of Jesus. Death is always tragic, and during recent months and years, it is entirely possible that you have lost people you love. There may be nothing about that which could be described as good, but the authors of the New Testament present the idea that the life of Jesus is unique and that the death of Jesus meant something unique. This was a new kind of Passover, with the lamb being Jesus himself. To me, there is real mystery attached to the atonement. This idea that his death was for our sins, and nevertheless, I do believe that to be true, and that for us, that is good. As Paul went on to write to the Corinthians, "Now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures." Now, of course, another part of what makes this news and this story good is that death was not the end of the story. But that will be another story, and for another day. God bless and have a wonderful Easter period.
Let the breath of God now fill me. Wholeness, fullness, life within me. Full forgiveness given freely, I receive as Jesus sends me. Listen to the words of the risen Christ.